Hi, and welcome to our Rencore webinar series about the SharePoint Framework. In the latest webinar, we talked about the SharePoint Framework and got introduced to that by Microsoft's very own Bill Beer. And with us today, we have Vesa Juvonen, who's a Senior Program Manager for OneDrive and SharePoint Engineering at Microsoft, who's going to tell us a bit more about what the SharePoint Framework means for us as developers. So welcome, Vesa. And joining Vesa, we also have Waldek Mastykarz, who's an Office PnP core team member and Microsoft MVP at Rencore, and myself, Tobias Zimmergren, who's going to be your host for this webinar, and I will take care of any incoming questions that you may want to ask Vesa and Waldek. And speaking of asking those questions, this webinar is a unique opportunity where you can learn more about the SharePoint Framework. You can ask all your questions using the Q&A tool in Zoom. I will moderate these questions and ask them to Vesa and Waldek after the presentations. And any questions that might not get answered due to time constraints, we will follow up through emails sent to all the attendees. And we will also follow up with the questions from the previous webinar at the same time. And also, all the recordings will be available after the webinar. So if you want to rewatch it or if you want to watch it later, then you can do that. And with that said, Vesa, recently we got introduced to the new preview of the SharePoint Framework in the previous webinar, and now we hope to dig slightly deeper today. So we're very excited to have you here, and very excited as well to hear what more you can tell us about the SharePoint Framework, if you want to take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Tobias. Let me actually share my screen. You can probably hear me fine, so that's just double checking that.
So first of all, Tobias, thanks for having me. Super excited on the SharePoint development opportunities within the SharePoint framework and where we're heading within the SharePoint development. And I think this is really kind of a groundbreaking change in the model how we or what we can do within the SharePoint development, and also the fact that we are actually aligning across the industry standard way of doing development together with SharePoint, which is actually super great. So meaning also the fact that when obviously there is a learning curve, but we as a developer, when we move into the SharePoint framework, we are able to, let's say, adapt the non-SharePoint technologies as well. And also the fact that if you are not that deeply within the SharePoint, you understand how to do still SharePoint customization. That's a really important thing as well. So we're kind of aligning the SharePoint development across the industry standard, like mentioned, and that's a huge deal. And we will be heading there gradually, first of all, and a few things kind of to mention based on the Bill's last week webinar. So the SharePoint framework right now is in a developer preview, only in the SharePoint Online, and only touching the client-side web parts. The SharePoint framework will be much more than the client-side web part gradually. But we'll get there during this calendar year, and we'll keep on introducing new capabilities here and there. Right now, as an example, quite common people are asking around the SharePoint framework and the branding capabilities and branding customizations, and those are something which we haven't actually released anything yet. There will be new information around that, I would say, at least within the Ignite timeframe. So in the Ignite, in some of the SharePoint sessions, we're going to talk about where we're heading from a branding perspective. So today we wanted to talk about deep dive into development using SharePoint framework. And first of all, deep dive always is a relative and subjective topic. So what is a deep dive for a SharePoint developer? It might be completely different. What is a deep dive for a web stack developer? But today we kind of take this from a perspective of a SharePoint developer. So you're a SharePoint developer. You've been working within the SharePoint farm-based solutions, maybe sandbox solutions, and adding model. And that would be our kind of a level setting on the deep topics. Bill did a good introduction last week to talk about, let's say, the basics and the key dimensions or the directions with the SharePoint framework. And we're going to spend more time today on the actual demos and within the code and looking into the tooling as well. Good. Before we actually go to the actual topic, we always want to remind people on the fact that we do have a lot of existing IP available for you to consume. And this is free IP, free samples and solutions which you can reuse within your customizations. So SharePoint Patterns and Practices, also known as the Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices, has been around for 2 years, or 2 years officially, 3 years unofficially. And we provide code samples, guidance documentations, monthly community calls, and actually bi-weekly office hours, weekly special interest group calls for SharePoint Framework as an example, where we then demonstrate these capabilities and go through what the SharePoint Framework is all about. And we actually go slightly even more detailed in some of the demos within the weekly calls than we do today. AKMS, SharePoint PNP, or Office Dev PNP, you'll land at that one page within the dev.office.com where you can find all of the relevant information around the SharePoint patterns and practices. One thing what I'm going to mention around this one, because there's always new people who are not that familiar of the SharePoint patterns and practices concept. So we kind of changed the SharePoint patterns and practices back in 2 years ago. SharePoint patterns and practices in the past was around deep dive, technical, academically correct way of implementing stuff, which is great, and that's a super valuable information if you're doing enterprise development. We, however, considered that, and then we decided that, well, there's a lot of people who want to move into the adding model, and like right now, the SharePoint Framework model. So we want to actually give guidance also on getting started. So it's not just the deep dive technical stuff. It's also around getting started on bedrooms, getting started on SharePoint Framework. And that's been kind of a fundamental difference in the classic patterns and practices and the SharePoint patterns and practices, or Office Dev patterns and practices. So don't get fooled on that one. There's a lot of deep stuff in the adding model already available, and there will be more deep information in the SharePoint patterns and practices for SharePoint Framework as well. One more kind of an additional marketing slide on that one. So AKMS, Office Dev PNP, AKMS, SharePoint PNP, the same resource. From there, you'll find a lot of links, a lot of information, samples, reusable material. You'll find a set of additional links within this slide. And you can easily access, for example, our YouTube videos. We pretty recently moved from a channel 9 to YouTube, but the YouTube channel is relatively new, so we don't have that many subscribers yet, but that's growing quite fast on a day-to-day basis. There's MSDN guidance already available, mainly for SharePoint add-ins, and then the official SharePoint Framework guidance is somewhere slightly different. We have a Microsoft tech community, Office Dev PNP, and Twitter chat, a lot of repos available for you to consume already today, not just the SharePoint Framework stuff. So also around the SharePoint adding model, what are we doing now with when we're moving away from sandbox solutions and so on. Good. Let's actually get going. One slide, what Bill already showed kind of last week. This is an introduction slide on the SharePoint extensibility principles. And this is really the fundamental thinking, what we have within the SharePoint engineering, where we are heading with SharePoint customizations. So if you think about that in the past, you as a developer, you've been provided different kind of ways of customizing SharePoint. But kind of if we exclude the farm solution way of doing SharePoint customizations, all of those ways for you to do customizations were something slightly different than what we in the engineering were doing. With SharePoint Framework, we are actually aligning the application development with first and third parties. And that might not mean a thing for you in the first sentence, but what it means is that we in engineering are actually building all of the modern capabilities using the SharePoint Framework as a baseline as well. So all of the new web parts, all of the new portal capabilities, all of that stuff is actually going to be built on the exact same framework what you will have available within your customizations. So that means that you have the same flexibility as we within the engineering to introduce capabilities. So it's no longer like engineering can do, let's say, hidden tricks and other stuff, but you can't. This is aligning the capabilities between the field and also what we do within the SharePoint side. And we want to actually build an industry-leading client-side solutions or enable you to build industry-leading client-side solutions for on-premises and in the cloud. So we are targeting the SharePoint framework for on-premises as well, and that would be SharePoint 2016. The exact timing for that is still, however, unclear. We first want to make sure that the SharePoint framework is fully stable. It's already fully, well, whenever it's fully released within a SharePoint Online, it's working properly, and then we're going to introduce that gradually to SharePoint 2016 to on-premises. And that's going to happen as part of feature packs at some point definitely in the next calendar year or around that. And I think CheckDeeper has given that kind of a schedule or timeline as the target for on-premises deployment. And we really want to make sure that the SharePoint has access on Microsoft Graph, and you can access the SharePoint also using any device. So one of the key principles of the SharePoint framework is to enable customizations which will be responsive and they adapt based on the device size. So as long as you follow up on using the right SharePoint framework platform and the development practices, your customizations will be dynamically and automatically available across the devices that people might be using. So also in a SharePoint app, which is already first versions are already available within the different app stores. Good. More on today's topic. So Bill last week talked slightly about the typical tooling on the SharePoint framework. So we're going to spend slightly time on this one, and I'm going to reflect that more on the, hey, I'm a traditional SharePoint developer. So what does it actually mean for me? So we will use in the SharePoint framework, we will use the Node.js, Yeoman group as the, let's say, the templating engine and the hosting engine when we do development. We'll write the code using TypeScript. Technically, well, theoretically, you can actually write code using just native JavaScript as well. But the TypeScript has actually a lot of benefits. It gives you the typings. It gives you the IntelliSense when you're writing JavaScript automatically. So it's a great enhancement for development time. And whenever we compile the TypeScript, it transforms into a native JavaScript, so it will be fully functional across different devices. And from a tooling and IDE perspective, you can actually use whatever IDE you want. You can use whatever cross-platform service tools. You can use Visual Studio Code, or you can use Visual Studio as well. And that's a really common, let's say, misconception in our messaging, because quite often the demos are used and demos are done using Apple platform. That's not because you would have to have a Mac or an Apple platform. It's more around, hey, we can do SharePoint development natively within the Mac platform as well. The Windows platform, absolutely fully supported. I'm running Windows. Waldek is going to do a few demos today as well, and he's running then a Mac platform. And I'm going to show how the Visual Studio tooling actually works in practice as well. From a framework perspective, we within the Microsoft, we have to select the one framework which will be the preferred framework for engineering, and that is React. It does not, however, mean that whenever you write something, you would have to write everything in React. It's just the underlying layer of the SharePoint framework, which is built using React. And you can see that actually within the SharePoint UIs or the modern UIs already. You can, however, choose whatever platform or framework you want to use. So you can build your stuff using Angular, like we're going to see today during the development, the demo. Or you can use Knockout, or you can use whatever Mastykarz or whatever third-party library is, either way you want. The React, quite often people are asking, why did Microsoft or SharePoint Engineering chose React? Well, technically we had to choose something. And for the purpose of the development and for the purpose of our interests, React was the suitable one to choose from. Is it then the official recommendation? Is it a best practice? Nope, that's not what it actually means. So best practices, first of all, do not exist. It always depends on your objectives. And second of all, you can choose to use whatever framework what you want to do. Good. Some kind of a, let's say, relationship between those tooling, because people are quite often, in quotes, freaking out whenever we introduce that, hey, we're going to use Node.js as the platform or NPM, and what does it actually mean? And I think the first impression is, let's say, more, horrible than it is actually. The Node.js is essentially the same as IIS Express. So it's going to act as your local web development box. It's just because the JavaScript web stack development is more aligned with the Node.js way of doing stuff. Node.js is basically acting as your local development box, which is then hosting your JavaScript and compiling that for you, or serving that for your browser. NPM is a Node package manager, which is essentially exactly the same as NuGet. And we're going to show today the Visual Studio, for example, the UI, how to choose whatever packages you want from NPM. So you can choose to do and use console applications, or there are actually UIs available also for you to do it. So if you are kind of a classic, I want to do stuff in Visual Studio, absolutely suitable as well. The group is same as build, so it's taking care of tasks, and you're able to automate stuff. There's a lot of automation already happening by the default templates. In the same way as the default templates had a lot of automation for MS Build, when you choose let's say, create a new SharePoint hosted add-in, there's a lot of automation in MS Build format, and that kind of relates on the templating model. So in the web stack development world, we're more moving into the Yeoman side. So Yeoman is just templating framework where we can then you can actually scaffold to your projects, and then you're able to start development. You don't have to use Yeoman for anything else than adding the additional templates to your project. Technically, once again, you could do that manually as well, or we can actually have a community project that is integrating, for example, Yeoman templates with the UI, Visual Studio, and all of that. So I wouldn't actually get super, let's say, scared on all of this new tooling. Typescript can be kind of adjusted in the same way as that's C#. It's pretty much the same, or the feeling is almost the same. But really the key benefit out of TypeScript is that you get an intelligence, you get a types when you're writing JavaScript, which is a big deal actually, because typically in JavaScript, you can easily accidentally rename or accidentally do a typo in your variables. And then if you have a massive JavaScript file, it might be really, really difficult to find that mistake. Good. From a development side, flow perspective, just kind of walking through the individual steps and how things are working. So now that we are in the web stack world, and at least right now we don't have, let's say, tooling for generating the project templates or the solutions of client-side web part solution for you, we're going to use the npm to install the SharePoint generator. And I just realized that the generator SharePoint is actually wrong. It's at in Microsoft/generator SharePoint. But what that means is that we are executing a command in a command line, which will download the needed templates from the internet, so that they are available within your local box to be used within your customizations or within your development. Then we actually run a Yo SharePoint. Yo means Yeoman, and Yo SharePoint means that the Yeoman is going to start the SharePoint template and the templating process. And essentially what it means is that the Yeoman template is going to ask what is the solution name, what do we want to actually introduce in a solution in a command line. It might be a change if you're coming from a SharePoint and a Visual Studio development side, but the only difference is that you're using a command line rather than a wizard within Visual Studio. And technically, it's relatively easy to implement a wizard to a Visual Studio as well. And we'll see if it's going to be Microsoft or will it be a community effort to introduce that at some point. From there, we actually start doing development. So development can be done using Visual Studio Code. You can do development in a Visual Studio. You can do development in any other development, any text editor, basically. Whenever you're ready within your development, you can always do gulp serve. And what it means is that we test the web part in practice. If you are using, for example, Visual Studio, and you're using the predefined Visual Studio templates, which are already available, and like mentioned, I'm going to show them today, the gulp serve is exactly the same as F5. So you can just quickly press F5, and you can actually get the stuff up and running. So you don't have to remember all of these commands. And that's going to actually launch a local workbench. And the local workbench is something where you can do testing without the connectivity to a SharePoint. And then you're able to do workbench testing also in the SharePoint Online or within the SharePoint context. So you're able to do offline development, or if you have connectivity to SharePoint or you want to do testing with SharePoint data, that's absolutely available as well. So the workbench is something which is available also within the SharePoint Online. Typically, there's always some issues, so we're going to actually do a recycle of that, or we're going to do checking, some coding, fixing, and then development and testing and all of that. Whenever we're ready, we do gulp package deploy command, and again, this is a gulp command which will then package your client-side web part as an SPF file, because client-side web parts from a SharePoint framework are actually app, well, in quotes, they are using, they're kind of an apps. They're using the app infrastructure to get them deployed and to get them included inside. They're not really add-ins, or they're not apps in the sense, in the classical sense of add-in or an app framework or app model. Gulp package will essentially package the solution, and then we can do gulp upload CDN. And gulp upload CDN means that, hey, now that we have this set of JavaScript and the definition as an SPF file, the SPF file contains the definition, what kind of web parts we have, what will be available, shown for end user. But then we have the actual implementation of the web part, and that's the JavaScript files. And those we need to host somewhere. Technically, we can host them in SharePoint. Typically, we would host them, for example, in Microsoft Azure. That's a CDN in a Microsoft Azure. And we do have a native tests right now for uploading that to Microsoft Azure. You can absolutely use whatever CDN you want to use. You can host them wherever you want, as long as they are available for the browser which is accessing the page. And then after that, we can upload the app file, SPF file, to the app catalog. And from the app catalog, we can install that client-side web part to be available within the site. And that's kind of the basic flow of the things. Right now, when we're talking, the client-side web parts are only available in the classic pages and only within the dev tenant. So you need to actually subscribe as dev tenant to be able to use them. But we're looking into adding availability for the SharePoint framework for other tenant types as well. So quite soon, if you have a existing first release tenants for your development, you can actually start using that as your platform. Now, walking through all of that, and mentioned quite a few times already, quite a typical request is saying, hey, I want to use Visa Studio. Hey, what is this, all of this additional things what you're trying to do with me? So can I use Visa Studio for development? And I think actually Bill got this question quite a few times last week as well, and that's the reason why I quickly want to share this one as well. So let's jump to a quick demo around the Visa Studio tooling. So let me switch to a Visual Studio, and that should be completely seamless switch because I'm actually sharing the whole screen. And this is a client-side web part which has been created using the Yeoman template, but after that it has been imported to a Visual Studio 2015, which has then the Node.js tooling installed. What it means is that in here, I'm going to actually quickly zoom in as well. If I extend my, for example, my web part section, I can see that I have my typical source file, my typical web part file. There's my actual web part TS file, which is the Typescript file for the individual web part. In this case, I actually have two different web parts in this one solution because absolutely doable and quite typical. Typical case to have multiple web parts which are relatively same kind, which you will be developing. And doing this, let's actually quickly do an F5. So this has been installed here or imported to the Visual Studio, and I can do it just quickly Google Chrome start. And as long as my Visual Studio starts compiling, let's actually, where do we actually get output? There we go, we're starting. So I'm just pressing F5. That's going to start the gulp automatically. So I don't need to actually do anything. This is just the gulp console running in CMD UI. And that's essentially now compiling that web part to be available. And what happens is that it actually starts my browser. And in my browser, we can see actually that I have two different web parts available. And here we go. There's my one web part, another super complex web part. Waldek is going to show slightly more complex today in follow-up demo. But then I can do the modifications and all of the things are working properly. Obviously, you can in the same way as within the Vesa Studio code or whatever platform, you can do updates within the code. So updating the message, and when I save, we can actually see the gulp being recompiled. And if I refresh the page, everything has been refreshed. So all of my changes, what I'm doing on the fly within the Vesa Studio, are being reflected within the browser as well. One benefit out of using the, one kind of benefit out of, would I say benefit? Benefit out of doing the TypeScript is also that obviously I can also find and do proper debugging. I can do some level of debugging in Visual Studio. We're introducing additional capabilities, most likely gradually within the native templates as well. But already today, you can relatively easily do debugging also within using the browser tooling. So as an example, I can go to my Visual Studio or VS web part, open up my TS file. Visual Studio has taken care of the mapping between my created the map files for my JavaScript and TypeScript. And what that means is that I can actually do breakpoints, or let's actually add a breakpoint there. So now if we do edit on a page, we can say that the breakpoint is hitting. We can also see the preview, and we are able to see what the information is available within these variables as an example. So the development experience isn't, how would I put it, definitely not bad, because you're able to do debugging in a browser. You're able to do debugging in the future also using alternative means. One thing what I wanted to quickly also show from a Visual Studio, let's say, support perspective, is that the Visual Studio offers some additional things as well. So quite often people tend to be slightly afraid of the console command line tooling. In Visual Studio, in the same way as you can manage NuGet packages, if you don't want to move in the console side, you're able to also use Visual Studio tooling, for example, for managing this NuGet. And in this case, I right-click the solution and selected install new NPM package. And that's actually, I'm searching jQuery, and there's my jQuery, and we can say that that's jQuery 3.1 coming from the NPM package. So you can absolutely have this kind of a, let's say, more classic development experience in a Visual Studio as well, if you prefer to do that. And from an enterprise development perspective, all of the Visual Studio typical, let's say, source code integration and all of that works in a Visual Studio without any problems. So natively supported from here as well. Good. Like mentioned, we're not going to actually do a super deep dive today. We're going to talk about things in some deep level, but not a deep in a web stack development. But what we also wanted to do is to have a real, let's say, example, not just a getting started example like this one, rather an example on the React/Angular JavaScript development. And we wanted to actually give our hosts, Rencore people, the opportunity to show their skill levels as well. So let's actually switch to Waldek at this point from a Visual Studio tooling side to have a look on how do we implement React/Angular-based web parts in practice. So Waldek, take it away.
Yes, thank you. So can you guys see my screen and can you hear me good?
Yeah, we've got it.
Awesome. So what you've seen so far is how you can use the new SharePoint framework on Windows. And actually, the funny thing is that everything you can do on Mac, you can do on Windows, but not everything you can do on Windows, you can do on Mac. So I don't have access to Visual Studio, and I don't have the nice wizards, but I can still build the same powerful SharePoint Framework client-side web parts, and everything that you will see now, you will be able to do on your Windows machines, Linux machines, or OS X. So here, what you can see now is a SharePoint Framework client-side web part that I built that shows the documents trending in this site using the Office graph. So even though you're seeing now SharePoint Workbench, if you look closely at URL, it's actually deployed to SharePoint Online, where I have the access to Office graph. So I actually put up the Workbench online and have it connected to my on-premises development machine, or actually my local dev box, where I host the web part. So from there, from the new SharePoint framework, I use REST to connect to the Office graph to show you documents trending in the site, which if you would put in the context of an intranet is a useful thing, right? Because if you would come to a new site, you can really easily see what the site is about and what's content actually currently active. So the way this works, and this is built in React, right? So the way this works is when you start the SharePoint Framework Yeoman generator, and you want to start a new project and add new web part, you will actually get a choice to pick whether you want to build web part using React, Knockout, or just no framework at all. And that prompt is only about the initial choice. No matter which one you pick, you can always go back and forth and choose framework, or actually use framework, use any framework you want. So even though you might start with React, and you might find out at some point that it's actually not the best match, you might actually remove all of it and actually go to Angular or to use something else, right? So here we have a SharePoint Framework client-side web part that I built in React. And if you know React a bit, the way it works is actually the web part is actually nothing else than the host for React component that does all of the work. So here, the only thing that the web part does is that it creates new instance of React component and activates it. That's it, right? All of the web part code is there. It fits almost on one screen, and it's really easy, right? Because all of the work happens in React. So if we go to React, here you can actually see all of the work that web part does in order to leverage the Office graph to show us document trending in this site. And if you know the Office graph a bit, you know that's actually, if you would like to go all the way from URL of a site that we have, all the way to documents trending in a site, there are quite a few things you have to go through in order to be able to show that, right? So first, you can, for example, see here, we have to get the list of members of the current site, right? Because Office graph is all about users. So that's the first step that we do. We get the list of members of the site. Then, because Office graph is based on search, we actually have to convert these email addresses that we get into actors. So we do that in the next call. Then we can call the Office graph to give us the list of documents trending in this site. Finally, we can show them on the screen. And we do that with React. So the great thing about React is that React Microsoft implemented Office UI Fabric in React, and all of that is already available as open source project on GitHub. So here, whenever you build a SharePoint Framework client-side web part in React, you can use that to show information in your app part. So in my case, I use the document card to actually show documents trending in this site. And if you look at this, they look great and I didn't have to do anything by myself, any work on my end, other than just than to pass information about document training in the site to React, and actually to have it shown as cards. So the way this works, if we go to the render method, which is all the way here, you can see that I call the document card with document card preview, title, activity, and all of that. And here I pass information about the documents. And for each document that I get trending in this site, I actually pass its URL ID, URL image, and all of that. So based on that, I can get the information that I get from the Office graph using REST to have that showed in web part on a page, right? So this is what you can do in React. If you go back a few years, actually the concept of SharePoint Framework is not new, right? For years now, we've building client-side apps in SharePoint, and some of us did that in Angular, some of us did that in Knockout, some of us did that in Aurelia. That basically depends on the choice and on your preference, but there's quite a big group who actually work with Angular. And even though initially when you create a new project, there is no Angular option to help you create new project, you can really easily use Angular to create new SharePoint Framework client-side web parts. So with that, I'd like to show you another web part that I've built, which is a really simple to-do list item or to-do management web part. So here you'll see a list of tasks, to-do tasks that I have. Some of them are done, like the one here. Some of them are not. And I can really easily add new task during the demo. And I just press enter, and that's being added to the list. And I can mark that as done. I can revert that, or I can just and get rid of the task from the list. So all of that is done in Angular. And the great thing about if you choose Angular to build client-side web parts in SharePoint framework is the fact that you can actually use Angular exactly the way you know it. So let me go back to code, and that's the web part that I've built in Angular. And here, if you know Angular, you will exactly know every single bit of that, right? So we start with template, and in this web part, I have one view, right? So I just included template directly in line. Question that I get asked a lot is there a way for me to take all of that away and require that internally here? So store templates separately and not directly in line. The answer to that is yes, you can do that, and you can do that really easily. The one consequence of that is that if you look closely, we actually use inline styles here, right? So all of that during the runtime is being replaced by the real names of these class names. So even though internally we define it as .todo web part, the class name that we get eventually during the runtime is different. And that has to do with the fact that SharePoint frameworks help us build classes that won't collide with anything else on the page, right? And if you move away your template directly from within the context of the web part and put it separately, for example, in an HTML file, you won't be able to benefit of that, right? So you will still work with global class names that might collide with other elements on the page, right? So you can do that, but there is trade-off to that, right? And then we bootstrap the Angular app, and from that we actually have still the module. We have data services that we use to connect to our data stores or to APIs, to REST endpoints, and then we have controller on the page that actually communicates or binds the view model to our services. So these elements, if you know Angular, you know all of that already, right? The only thing that you have to learn that's somewhat different is how you pass properties from the web part to Angular, right? Because if we go back to the page here, there are a few things that I can change. Let me increase the screen size. There are a few things that I can change here to actually control how the web part is shown on a page, right? So I can, for example, choose whether I want to show tasks that are done or not. So I enable that, apply, and actually the web part is shown differently. And I can change that. Here also I can change the name of the list, API URL, and that's up to you to show what you want to configure here. But the thing is, how do you pass that? So properties that you can configure in the web part to Angular, right? Because Angular is actually its own app, and it lives inside the web part, but it doesn't really know about the web part. So a way to do that is to broadcast an event within the web part to Angular, to root scope. So with that, every single time property of the web part changes, we are within the render added here. So let me just collapse that. So with that, every single time we change something about the web part, the render function will run. And here we have the ability to broadcast an event that we then subscribe to from Angular. So here we say, okay, so this is the state of our hide finish task property. Here is the API of our REST endpoint. Here is the name of the list. And if we go to our controller, here we have an event that subscribes to that. So here we monitor the event, and every single time it occurs, we actually reinitialize the application. So using the new values that we got, like the API URL, name of the list, and the state of tasks, we actually reload the data. And it's up to you to specify the logic that you would like to do here. The trick is that that's one way that you can use to subscribe to events that occur within the web part in Angular. So with that, I'd like to give it back to our host to follow up on the agenda.
All right, thank you for that, Waldek. Let me take over the screen here. All right, so thank you, Vesa, and thank you, Waldek, for those insights. And we have received a lot of questions this time around as well. So we'll try to start from the top of the pile and move down and walk through most of the questions. And like we said before, any questions we don't have time to answer during the timeframes of this webinar, we will send through email as well. And that will also include the questions from the previous webinar for anyone who attended that. And so to kick the Q&A off, I actually have a question here from a guy called Rainer, who's saying, so current SharePoint framework is just about web parts. Will there be other features included as well to build like enterprise solutions, event receivers, fetching data from configuration lists with elevated privileges or anything like that? And of course, also the branding approach. So I don't know, maybe Vesa, if that's something you would like to dig
absolutely.
into.
Absolutely. So we start by introducing now client-side web parts, but we will be introducing additional capabilities. I'm not going to name those capabilities right now, but we're looking into having kind of a similar set of customization options like you have right now using the adding model or using the classic UI options within SharePoint Online. So having kind of a script embedding capabilities across site collection or a tenant level, that's in the pipeline as well. There's going to be branding changes in the SharePoint Online in general. There's going to be additional changes as well. Which of those will be technically part of the SharePoint framework? That's absolutely slightly debatable. So it's kind of a will the new branding capabilities be called or be part of the SharePoint framework umbrella? We'll see how they will be bundled into. There's a lot of pending changes, which we're working in engineering, but at the same time, a lot of this stuff is still in the development. So we can't actually go publicly and say, when it's going to come out, and what it's going to actually contain, because some of the areas is still in the development. But we'll just to kind of reinforce the message, whatever you have in an existing customization platform, we're looking into introducing similar capabilities or enabling similar functionalities and functional or achieve same functional requirements using the modern technologies as well. Remote event receivers, webhooks, remote event receivers absolutely work still in the SharePoint Online. We're not going to take an adding model also away. The adding model will be there, fully supported. It's the model for the store right now, because the SharePoint Framework client-side web parts, it won't have a store in at least in the first phase. The adding model is providing an isolation from a security perspective. So there's few different aspects from that side. So, and you can always mix and match. You can do some parts using the adding model or app model, whatever you want to call that, and then using the SharePoint client-side web part or framework.
Right. So there's a lot to look forward to. That's what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So, the next question I have here is probably a short one. And are there TypeScript libraries for interacting with SharePoint, or do we have to use the old sp.js model?
So technically, when you're talking to SharePoint, you would be using the REST APIs typically for that. Now, there are community efforts. As an example, the JavaScript Special Interest Group in the PNP JavaScript Special Interest Group has implemented, together with community members, a super powerful library, which will ease up access from the TypeScript, the information, the SharePoint information. So just by writing a few lines of JavaScript, you can access all of the items in a list or the whatever information from this item. So that kind of encapsulates the REST APIs. But basically, the model is that there will be, from a SharePoint engineering perspective, we'll provide powerful RESTful APIs, and then it's up to the community to decide, do they want to actually build a library which will then make the access of the RESTful APIs even easier, or will you hit those REST APIs using TypeScript or JavaScript? But I would actually highly recommend on checking the client-side JavaScript PNP JavaScript core library. It's a super implementation, and which makes accessing information in SharePoint with JavaScript super easy.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes and in the links as well, sending out. So yeah, I really like that approach that a developer can now, with full transparency, use whatever framework they want. So the next question, which kind of relates to that, is there a public roadmap for the SharePoint framework so we know what's coming?
And that's a fair question, and I do know that, and I would hope that we would have more transparency from a roadmap and also from a scheduling perspective. Now, I'm known to be super transparent and open and honest on my communications, and I would say that well, first of all, we don't have an open roadmap right now. We kind of again reiterate the roadmap in Ignite. Ignite will happen in 3 weeks, unless in 3 weeks. And then after that, we probably can provide high-level roadmap in the written format. There's a lot of areas where things are still moving, and we in Microsoft we've been kind of moving into more just agile way of doing development. In the past, we actually knew what's going to happen within the 6 months. Right now, there's a lot of things and ideas which we're going to implement within the 6 or 12 months. But which of them will come first? Which of them will come slightly later? How do we prioritize them? We'll adjust as we go. And that essentially means that we can provide a definite and locked roadmap or a schedule, because it might be that some capability is going to go away. And we don't want to give the field or customers or partners the indication that, let's say, the new SharePoint branding capabilities will be released in October. What if it will be delayed for 6 months? And then the partners and customers will be even further furious on the situation. And that's really it's a classic challenge. We do understand that we should be more open and honest and transparent, but in some areas we just can't. That's really the deal with behind it.
Right. Yeah, that's understandable as well, right? Okay, so the next question, we are a bit limited on time, so I will throw this in there as well. And it is that we heard from Bill last week that SharePoint Framework will be available on SharePoint 2016. Does it mean that we can use the exactly same code, or will there be differences in the on-prem versus the cloud versions of the SharePoint Framework?
So the SharePoint framework is really around the UI and really around the frameworks, what we will have, although the capabilities, what are within the SharePoint UI perspective. There's no kind of, let's say, SharePoint Online dependent capabilities within a SharePoint framework, because there's no APIs which would be only available as such within a SharePoint Online. And that means that basically, and again, I need to get that small, maybe not, but I would say the probability of often small itsy-bitsy API changes is really, really small. So we are looking into providing exactly the same capabilities for SharePoint Online and on-premises. So if the web part works in on-premises, it will work in SharePoint Online and vice versa, because the APIs are in the UI level. And there's, like mentioned, there's no Azure limitation. There's no additional, let's say, API layer, which would be only available within SharePoint Online, at least for now. So things might change in the future, but hopefully we will get this one slightly better way implemented than even with the client-side object model, because client-side object model is a good example of a challenge. We have different versions for SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2015, and SharePoint Online. So it's a classic challenge.
Right. So related to that, to the SharePoint framework being a UI model and used a lot in the UI, there's a question saying, can you manipulate the global navigation using the SharePoint framework, which I suppose is a quite common question these days as well, right?
Yes, that's a super, super common scenario. And I think people are using the classic JavaScript embedding models for that, using the user custom action capabilities. Now, technically, how would I put it? We're looking into enabling that kind of customization scenarios using a slightly different, using the SharePoint client-side, using SharePoint framework, but not using the client-side web part implementation, which is out right now. So we're looking into absolutely enabling that kind of a typical scenarios for providing custom global navigation customizations. And that's going to come sooner or later in the roadmap whenever we get this stuff gradually out from the engineering side. We absolutely understand the challenge. We absolutely understand that the modern UIs, for example, the list and library UIs, you cannot customize them using the user custom action technique, which we introduced from a PNP perspective 3 years ago. But there's a good side, which kind of a, how would I put it? It's a donkey bridge, like we say in Europe, to an interesting topic, which is right now, the SharePoint patterns and practices and Office 365 patterns and practices is owned by the SharePoint engineering. And one of the reasons why it's owned by the SharePoint engineering is that the SharePoint engineering wants to understand how our partners and customers are customizing SharePoint, so that they can actually take these usage scenarios into account and they understand the impact of the chosen path. We've been having a few mistakes in the way. We are learning from those mistakes, and the teams within the engineering are learning from those mistakes. And in the future, more and more people are using the community to validate their assumptions. So we're trying to avoid the fact that somebody who has never met a customer would make a decision into a certain direction by using these community efforts like the PNP as an example, to try that input from the field towards the engineering.
Right.
That was a pretty far-fetched donkey bridge, but still. And donkey bridge means a segue. In natively, in English, it's a segue.
Right, yeah. So with that said, we don't really have time for more questions. We're running a little bit over time here with 1 minute. So just to follow up on what Vesa mentioned before about the PNP, there's plenty of great resources available for learning more about that I myself have been using for a couple of years. So Vesa, would you just care to elaborate where people can get in touch with the PNP and learn more about it?
Yes, so this is kind of a slide which is more targeted on the SharePoint framework. And first of all, we moved our YouTube, video channel to YouTube. So more and more you will see videos around the SharePoint framework and those capabilities within the YouTube. We are still using the channel 9 for these videos as well, but the YouTube is our main publishing format. We have a Twitter account, Office Dev PNP. We have SharePoint PNP call, which is a monthly community call where we go through what are the new samples, what are the new capabilities, what are the contributions from the community, and also SharePoint PNP JavaScript SIG special interest group. And that's where we concentrate weekly basis on going through what has happened within the SharePoint framework, doing demos, community demos, and showing stuff and having open discussion. Because there's so many questions, as we can see today, for community to ask. We want to have a weekly calls, bi-weekly calls, and a monthly calls so that we from engineering can help you with these questions, either using the forums or issue lists or then joining on these calls and have a question and open discussion about those things. In the SharePoint framework side, in the GitHub, we just started opening up the repos. There will be more repos opened up pretty soon, and more samples coming under the SharePoint framework side as well. The classic PNP repos, they still remain. We keep on evolving them as well. So if you're right now doing production development, you're still doing adding model because the SharePoint framework is in the future. It's in the developer preview. So existing PNP stuff absolutely will remain. We keep on updating that. There will be new stuff on that one. Well, pretty soon actually. September release is on Friday. And then use the community. The Office 365 Yammer network, unfortunately, will be shut down on 15th of September, which is really, really unfortunate. So we're moving into our communications and discussions to network.office.com. So AKMS SPPNP community. We'll update that AKMS link if somebody makes decisions to shut down our platform again, but hopefully not. But PNP is really community effort. We, from engineering side, we want community to participate on this one. We want to hear from you what's actually wrong and what should be fixed. We want to make sure that you have a channel to listen and also share your learnings and your, let's say, samples for others to consume. So hopefully we will see you more and more within this PNP effort.
Yeah, and I've seen that grow as well over the last couple of months only, that there's a lot more people getting interest and getting, providing feedback to Microsoft as well through the PNP effort. So, all respect and kudos to you guys for pulling that off, because there's a lot of good people in the community contributing with a lot of stuff in there that I find, very useful. Essentially every week there's coming in new stuff. So that's really cool. Yeah. So time is up for this round, and we've had a lot of questions that we don't have time to answer. So again, these will be followed up and answered through the email, and we'll also follow up with the questions from Bill's webinar last week. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Vesa, and thank you, Waldek, for your insights throughout this webinar. And also thank you all who attended the webinar and for all the interesting questions. And I promise we'll send you an email with all of the answers to whatever we can find in those questions. And the recordings will be sent to all the attendees that have signed up for the webinar as well. And if you want to see the previous webinar as a recording, you can go to our website, spcaf.com, and you can find that in the blog. It's published already. And with that said, see you next time. Thank you and bye.